Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going behind the curtain of government contracting, specifically with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We've got this document here, and it's full of questions from companies, trying to win a bid for a big construction project. And, of course, we've got the government's answers, too. It's kind of like a sneak peek into how to really land one of these big contracts.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how these companies are thinking. The questions they ask, it's not just them needing clarification, it's them trying to figure out the best way to position themselves. Like they're already strategizing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's jump right in. So right away, we see a question about asbestos and lead paint. These bidders want to know if they'll have to handle surveys and testing.
And get this, the government basically says, well, you might need to do that, but you don't have to worry about actually removing it. It's like they're drawing this very clear line saying, you handle this part, but we're not asking you to go that far.
Yeah, that's interesting. Makes you think they might be trying to, limit their liability or something. I mean, dealing with hazardous materials can be a legal nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of hazards, there was this whole back and forth about hazardous materials investigations. At first, the government kind of hinted that contractors might have to do these investigations themselves, but then they changed their mind and took it off the table completely.
Wow, now that's curious. I'd love to know what happened there. Did the bidders push back? Was there some kind of internal debate within the government? It really shows that this process is a real negotiation with both sides trying to find that sweet spot.
Right, exactly. And it also kind of shows that the government is actually listening to feedback, which is good. They're not just, barking orders. They're open to making the process better, maybe a little fairer.
I like that. So then there's this question, and I think we've all been there, about page limits. Can you imagine trying to fit all the details of your company's, awesomeness into a limited number of pages, especially for a government bid?
Oh, yeah, it's like bureaucratic Tetris, trying to make everything fit perfectly.
Huh.
And these bidders, they had a ton of questions about what counted towards the limit. Like, do fold-out charts count as one page or two? And what about tabs and dividers?
And you know what? The government actually gave very specific answers to every single one of those questions. They even had to clarify whether resumes and past performance forms counted, which luckily they don't. Can you imagine?
This whole thing about page limits, it says something about how the government looks at these bids. It's not just about having the best experience. It's about presenting it in a way that the people reading these applications can easily understand.
It's like they're saying, we know you're great, but prove it to us quickly.
Exactly. And that leads to another interesting thing, the limit on resumes. Only 2 per discipline are allowed, even for the project manager.
Wow, that's tough. You can really see how competitive this whole process is. Companies really got to choose their team carefully and put their best foot forward.
It's all about quality over quantity.
Yeah.
The government wants a team of experts, not a huge team with a bunch of maybes.
Right, makes sense. Now, this next part might seem simple, but it could be a deal breaker for some companies where the work's going to be done. It's limited to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers North Atlantic Division, so no Europe, no overseas projects.
And that just shows how important it is for your company to be able to work where the project is. Imagine bidding on a project and then realizing you can't actually do the work because your team's on the other side of the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a reminder to, always read the fine print. Even the little details can matter.
Speaking of fine print, there's this interesting bit about the Department of Defense contract volume. It's not a requirement, but the government might use data from this system called the Federal Procurement Data System, FPDS for short, as a tiebreaker.
So what does that tell you?
To me, it sounds like there are a lot of companies competing for these contracts, and they all have pretty impressive track records. The government needs every tool they can get to help them decide who gets the award.
So past performance is really important. It's not just about what you say you can do, it's about what you've actually done.
Exactly. Now let's talk about small businesses. Bidders have to explain how they'll involve small businesses in the project, and the government is very clear that this plan should be based on the entire value of the contract, not just the parts that are subcontracted.
That's interesting. It's not just about giving small businesses a little piece of the pie. It's about making them a real part of the team.
It shows that the government really wants to support small businesses and create more diversity in this industry. They want to level the playing field and give smaller companies a chance to compete with the big guys.
Now we're getting into the details of experience. The government lists 14 specific types of projects they're looking for, and they even rank them in order of importance. But the bidders seem a little confused about how to showcase all of this experience in their applications. Like, should they try to cram it all in or spread it out?
This is where it gets tricky, trying to translate real-world experience into the language of government bureaucracy. Companies need to figure out how to package their expertise in a way that matches the government's specific criteria.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. You have all this experience, but you have to present it in a way that the government can understand and evaluate.
Right. And then we get into a discussion about the types of military facilities that are part of the project. Bidders are asking for more details, throwing out examples like airfield facilities, communication facilities, and central energy plants.
So what did the government say?
They basically said, hey, that list we gave you, it's not everything. It's like a little hint that this project might involve way more than they initially let on. These bidders better be ready for anything.
Yeah, it shows that you really need to do your homework and understand the entire scope of the project. No surprises allowed.
Exactly. Now let's look at the qualifications needed for specific roles. There's this interesting conversation about the construction manager position. Initially, the government wanted a licensed professional engineer, but then they said, okay, a certified construction manager would work too.
So it sounds like they're more focused on experience than on specific titles. It's all about finding someone who can get the job done no matter what.
It's a good approach. It recognizes that people can get their skills in different ways.
And last but not least, we've got this whole discussion about the commissioning specialist role and the qualifications they need. Things get really interesting here. One bidder mentions this new certification from HHRE, that leading engineering organization.
Yeah, they're talking about the Building Commissioning Professional Certification, or BCXP. It's even recognized by the Department of Energy. So the bidder is basically like, hey, why isn't this awesome certification on your list of requirements?
And you know what? The government actually listened. They said they'll update their requirements to include the BCXP. That's amazing. It shows they're willing to keep up with the latest industry standards.
And it also shows how important it is for bidders to speak up and share their knowledge. Don't be afraid to push back a little. You might be surprised by how receptive the government can be.
It's a good reminder that the world of construction and engineering is always changing. New certifications, new technologies, you gotta stay on top of it all. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've got way more to unpack, so stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive. Going through all these questions and answers, it's like a crash course in how this whole government contracting thing works.
It's amazing how much strategy goes into these bids, right? It's like every little detail, every question, they're all carefully planned to show off what the company's good at and make sure they fit what the government's looking for.
Yeah, definitely. It's not just about having the right experience. It's about knowing the rules and how to play the game,
Yeah.
Like this question here about whether they can use projects on resumes that were completed in the last 7 years.
Oh, yeah. And the government says those are fine. But the fact that they even ask that shows you how fast things change in this industry. 7 years might seem like a long time, but with technology changing so quickly and all the regulations always being updated, you got to show that your skills are current.
It's like they're saying, we need to know you're not stuck in the past. Show us you can handle the latest and greatest.
Exactly. And then there's this question about whether they need a resume for a program manager. And the government says, nope, not required. Might seem like a small thing, but it tells you a lot about how the project is structured.
Yeah, it's like they're saying they want people who can manage specific tasks, not necessarily someone to oversee the entire program.
It's a good reminder that you got to pay attention to the exact roles the government needs filled. Don't waste your time showcasing skills they're not even looking for.
Always got to keep the audience in mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do they want and how can you prove you've got it?
Exactly. And speaking of space, we've got another page limit question. This time they want to know if the cover pages, tabs, and that cover letter count towards the 110-page limit for the SF330 Part 1.
The eternal struggle with page limits. We've all been there.
Right. But good news, the government says, nope, those don't count. Small victory, but it shows they're not trying to be super strict. They get that you need some formatting to make it look professional.
It's all about that balance, right?
Yeah.
Making it clear and concise, but still looking good.
Now, here's a question about qualifications. One bidder asks if a registered fire protection engineer with a degree from an accredited university, but the program's been shut down since, if that would still count.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, and the government is clear. They say the degree has to be from a university that's currently accredited by NCEEs, the National Council of Examiners for Engineering and Surveying.
So accreditation is really important here. They want to make sure all the engineers working on these projects meet the same high standards. Makes you wonder if that bidder is scrambling to find someone with the right credentials now.
Yeah, could be. And, remember that discussion about the commissioning specialist role and that HHRAE certification?
Oh yeah, the Building Commissioning Professional Certification, or BCXP.
That's the one. Well, the bidder brings it up again. They really want to make sure the government understands how relevant this certification is, especially since the Department of Energy recognizes it.
And they're right to push for it. It's important to make sure they're using the latest standards when they're evaluating people.
And the best part, the government listened. They said they'll update their requirements to include the BCXP. It's a win-win. Shows they're willing to stay current and the bidders get a fair shot.
So then there's a question about what they actually mean by military testing facilities. The bidder's looking for specific examples.
And the government gives them a few, like facilities that test munitions and nerve agents. Kind of gives you a glimpse into how sensitive some of these projects are. It's not just about building stuff. It's about creating spaces where they can do this really specialized and sometimes dangerous work.
Wow, so the stakes are even higher than in regular construction. You're talking about national security and hazardous materials and all that.
Exactly. And it just shows how important it is for these bidders to really understand all the specific requirements and have the right team for the job, with security clearances and all that.
Now let's talk about the Small Business Participation Plan. One bidder asks about what the district's goals are for working with small businesses and how they calculate those goals. Are they looking at the percentage of subcontracts or the total amount earned?
And here's the weird thing. The government says the USEC doesn't actually have any specific goals for small business participation. Seriously. That's unexpected. Now I'm really wondering how committed they are to working with small businesses. Or maybe it's, a way for them to choose bigger companies more easily. Definitely raises some questions.
We'll have to see how it all plays out in the end. Now, someone asked about whether they can include introductions to sections E and F of the SF 330. Those sections where you lay out your company's experience and qualifications?
Right.
The government's like, sure, go ahead, but they're not necessary, and they'll count towards your page limit. It's like a little nudge, don't waste space on fluff when you could be showing off your skills.
Make every word count, right. Now, this next question's a good one. How do you prove you can handle multiple tasks at the same time if you can't use IDIQs as examples? Those indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts.
Yeah, that's tricky. But the government says what they really want to see is that you can manage multiple things at once, whether it's under one IDIQ or several. They want proof you can juggle, which makes sense, right? These aren't just one-and-done projects. It's a lot of complex stuff going on at the same time. You got to be organized.
And they even suggest that bidders use narratives, tell a story about how they'd manage their teams and resources.
It's like, don't just tell us you're good at multitasking. Show us.
Exactly. Then there's a question about whether any company can bid or if it's only for small businesses.
So is it a fair competition, or do smaller companies get special treatment?
The government says it's a completely open competition. Anyone can bid, big or small. So they really are trying to find the absolute best contractor for the job, even if it means going up against the giants.
I like that. Competition is good, right? Pushes everyone to be better.
And then guess what? We're back to the question about whether a registered architect can be the construction manager instead of a licensed professional engineer.
Someone's really hoping for a different answer this time.
But the government sticks to their guns. They say again that it can be either a professional engineer or a certified construction manager. It doesn't really matter.
So they're really looking for the best person, regardless of what their official title is. It's all about what you can do, not just what your resume says.
Totally. Okay, then there's a request to clarify what kind of environmental engineering expertise they need for this project.
I bet that's a long list.
It is. Get ready: water and wastewater treatment, permitting, stormwater management, wetlands, floodplains, threatened and endangered species, and NEPA. The National Environmental Policy Act.
Wow, that's a mouthful. You need a whole team of experts just for that.
It just shows how complex these projects are, especially when it comes to the environment. You got to have the right people for every aspect.
Yeah, that's where those specific resumes become really important. You got to show you've got the right experts on your team.
Okay, next up, someone asks if they have to submit data about their volume of DoD contracts. Remember that thing about the government using past performance as a tiebreaker?
Yeah, I remember.
Well, they say it's not required to include that information, but they will check the Federal Procurement Data System, or FPDS, if they need to break a tie.
So past performance matters, but it's not the only thing they look at.
Right. They're considering everything, your qualifications, your plan, your team's expertise. But if it's really close, your track record could be the deciding factor.
It's like a reminder to always do your best work, because you never know who's watching.
Then someone asks about that small business participation plan again. Remember how they said they don't have specific goals for it?
Yeah, I'm still a little confused about that whole thing.
Well, this time they want to know if they need to send a hard copy of the plan.
Oh, so like old school paper.
Yep, 3 copies, please.
So even in the digital age, sometimes you got to go analog.
And it's another reminder to pay attention to the details. Even something as simple as how to submit a document can make a difference.
Then there's a question about whether they can include projects that are 100% design complete in their list of 10 projects, even if they were finished more than 5 years ago.
And the government says, sure, no problem. So that gives them some wiggle room to show off their best work, especially if design skills are important for this project.
Makes sense, right? Highlight your strengths, even if it was a while ago.
And you guessed it, the question about the registered architect as the construction manager is back.
They're really determined, aren't they?
But the government politely directs them back to their previous answer, reminding them it can be a professional engineer or a certified construction manager.
Sticking to their guns, they want the best person for the job, period.
Exactly. Okay, then another repeat question. Can a registered fire protection engineer with a 4-year engineering degree from an accredited university be accepted?
Deja vu.
And again, the government points back to their original answer. The fire protection engineer needs a degree from a university accredited by NCEs. No exceptions.
Consistency is key, right? They got to be fair to everyone and apply the rules the same way across the board.
And it also shows how important it is to be clear. No room for misinterpretation. Now, you won't believe this, but we've got another question about page limits. This time, they want to know if the small business participation plan and all the cover stuff, the cover, tabs, dividers, and cover letter count towards the page limit. You'd think they'd have figured this out by now. But the government, like a pro, just refers back to their previous answer, reminding them that tabs and dividers don't count. They're getting good at this.
It's actually a good sign, right? Shows they're paying attention and trying to make everything as clear as possible.
Totally. Okay, next question is about whether the CPAR SPPQs, the Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System, and past performance questionnaires are included in the total page count.
Yeah, those are important. They show what you've actually accomplished.
Right. And the government clarifies that the SF330 Part 1, which is all about your company's experience, can't be longer than 110 pages. But the Part 2 and the CPAR SPPQs, those are separate, and they don't count towards the limit.
That's good, right? Gives them enough space to show off their qualifications without getting penalized for having lots of past performance documentation.
It shows that past performance matters, but it's not the only thing. They're looking at the big picture.
So you got to prove yourself, but you also got to show your potential.
Then we have a bidder who's a little confused about the wording for the page limits. They're saying it sounds contradictory because Part 1 and Part 2 are different documents, and usually only Part I has a page limit.
So they're basically saying, can you just make it clear that the page limit is only for Part 1?
And the government, efficient as always, just points back to their previous answer, which already said that the Part 2s and CPAR's PPQs don't count towards the Part I limit.
No need to repeat themselves, right? They already made it clear.
And it's another reminder for the bidders to read everything carefully. Sometimes the answer is right there. All right, guess what's next? Yep, another question about that AACE commissioning certification. That bidder is persistent.
They know what they're talking about.
And the government keeps their word. They confirm, again, that they'll update the requirements to include the BCXP.
It pays to be persistent, Right. Don't be afraid to follow up and make sure they heard you.
And it shows how this whole process can be collaborative.
Yeah.
The government isn't just dictating terms. They're working with the bidders to get the best outcome for everyone.
Okay, last question for this part. Someone wants to know if the government is planning to advertise more cleared AE IDIQs. Those are contracts for architectural and engineering services that require security clearances.
Sounds like they're trying to get a sense of the competition and see what other opportunities are out there. Always good to be prepared.
It's all about staying ahead of the game.
And the government says the current plan is outlined in the contract information under the description section. They also mention that the information about future opportunities is from 2019, so things might have changed since then.
Things change fast in this world, don't they?
It's a good reminder to always check the latest information, Don't rely on old stuff or rumors. Go straight to the source.
So what have we learned so far? This whole government contracting thing is all about paying attention to details, knowing the rules, and being ready to adapt. But we're not done yet. Stick around for part 3, where we'll wrap it all up and see what we can take away from all of this. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. We've really been digging into these questions and answers. It's been pretty eye-opening. What about you?
Oh, totally. It's like we got a sneak peek behind the scenes of this whole world of government contracting. And it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
So as we wrap up, what are your biggest takeaways from all this back and forth between the companies and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? What really stood out to you?
You know, the main thing for me is that this is a game of precision. It's not just about being good at what you do. It's about knowing exactly how to present yourself, understanding all the rules, and really anticipating what the government needs.
That's a great point. It's almost like they're saying, we need to know you can color inside the lines, even though the lines are, like, super complicated and maybe even invisible sometimes.
Exactly. And a perfect example of that is, remember how they emphasize needing recent experience? Like, all those projects on your resume had to be from the last 7 years.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting. It really shows how quickly things change in this industry.
Yeah.
You got to keep up, or you'll get left behind.
It's like if you're still using techniques from 7 years ago, you're practically a dinosaur to them.
Makes you think about how important it is to, keep learning new things, not just in this field, but in anything that's always changing.
And speaking of pushing yourself, another takeaway is don't be afraid to be proactive. These bidders weren't just answering questions. They were using every chance they got to show off their skills, make things clearer, and even, question the government's requirements when they needed to.
They were playing chess, not checkers. They were thinking several steps ahead.
Right. They weren't afraid to push back and ask the hard questions, which is something everyone needs to learn to do. You got to be your own advocate.
Definitely. So what about that whole small business thing? That was kind of a mixed message, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm still not sure what to make of that. They stressed the importance of including small businesses, even wanted to see their plans, but then they admitted they don't have any specific goals for how much they work with them.
I know, right? It makes you wonder how much they actually care about working with small businesses. Is it just for show, or are they really committed to diversity?
Hard to say, but it's definitely something for these companies to think about. How much should they focus on that in their proposals? Maybe there are other areas where they have a better chance of standing out.
So many things to consider. It's all about understanding what the government really wants and adjusting your strategy.
Absolutely. And this brings up another important point. Clear communication is key. The government really stressed staying within those page limits, using simple language, and avoiding all that technical jargon.
Less is more, especially when you're trying to get your point across quickly.
And it's not just what you say, it's how you present it. Remember all those questions about what counted towards the page limit? The charts, the tabs, the dividers.
Oh, yeah, they wanted to know about every little thing.
It just goes to show that even the small stuff can make a difference. Your document has to be easy to read and understand, and it should look professional.
So presentation matters. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've talked about precision, strategy, communication. What else stood out to you?
Don't forget about staying informed. This whole government contracting world is always changing. New technology, new rules, new best practices. You got to stay on top of it all.
Yeah, like that whole thing with the HRE commissioning certification. The bidder mentioned it. The government listened, and they actually updated their requirements. That was pretty cool.
It shows they're willing to adapt, but it also shows that the bidders have to speak up and share what they know. You can't expect the government to know about every single new thing. You have to tell them and explain why it's important.
So never stop learning. You got to keep growing and developing your skills if you want to stay ahead of the game.
Right. And finally, even though this is super competitive, remember that it's also a partnership. The government wants to work with people who can help them get things done, so communication and building relationships are important too.
It's not just about getting the contract, it's about finding the right fit for everyone.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, think about this. How can you apply what we learned about precision, strategy, communication, and staying adaptable to your own work? It doesn't matter what field you're in, these are skills that can help you overcome challenges and reach your goals.
That's a great takeaway. This has been a fascinating look into the world of government contracting. It's all about ambition, planning, and paying attention to every detail. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.